Hey folks, it's Mr. Oleson. We're in Macro Unit 4, the financial sector. The topic of this video is 4.5, the money market. There's a market for money. It's good old-fashioned supply and demand. It's an important key graph of macroeconomics. So make sure you pay attention, you practice drawing it, you practice labeling it, because you'll definitely need to draw this and analyze it on your AP macro exam. First, let's take a look at the demand side. People in the economy have a demand for money, which is the most liquid form of asset, i.e. the M1 money supply, for two different reasons. The first reason is they have a transaction demand for money because they want to go out there and make transactions to buy the goods and services that they need. You need money in your checking account for that. You got to pay rent, buy groceries, pay for your Netflix subscriptions, etc., etc. So that's going to give you some quantity demanded for money. And then secondly, you have an asset demand for money. So in addition to the money you need on hand for your daily transactions, you also want to hold money because it's an asset. It's a way that you can store future purchasing power without having to worry about the risk of losing it. You can take money and invest it in a whole bunch of other things, but most other asset forms are going to have some form of risk involved. Money doesn't have any risk. So when you decide how much money you're going to hold in your cash in your pocket or in your checking account, you must compare it to the opportunity cost of doing so. So what is the opportunity cost of holding money? It's the next best alternative. If you would have taken that money and put it somewhere else, what could you be earning? Well, you could be earning interest. If you were to take extra money out of your checking account and put it in stocks, bonds, and real estate, you would be earning interest. That's what you're giving out by holding money. So let's think about that. What's going to happen to our quantity demanded of money when interest rates go up? So if I'm holding money in my checking account and all of a sudden the interest rate goes way up, what's going to happen to my quantity demanded of money because of that change in opportunity cost? Well, the quantity demanded is going to fall because individuals are going to prefer to hold interest earning assets instead. So I'm always going to need my quantity demanded for money for transactions, but any extra penny I can take out of my checking account and move over to an interest-bearing asset, I'm going to do it when interest rates increase. What about, on the other hand, when interest rates decrease? So what's going to happen to the quantity of money demanded when interest rates decrease? Well, my opportunity cost of holding money is going to decrease, so my quantity demanded, money demanded is going to increase. There's no incentive to convert cash into interest earning assets because even if I went through the trouble of moving it over to my credit union and getting a certificate of deposit or investing in some real estate project, I'm not going to get that high of returns anyway, so I might as well just keep that money in my checking account. Therefore, you see the law of demand here. It's a good old-fashioned law of demand. There's an inverse relationship between the interest rate, which is the price of money, and the quantity of money demanded. So because there's an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money demanded, we're going to have a downward sloping demand curve, just like a market demand curve. Take a look at this. We're now building our money market graph. On the vertical, we have price. The price of money is the interest rate. And on the horizontal, we have quantity. In this case, it's the quantity of money. And for the reasons we just established, there's going to be a downward sloping demand curve for money. As the interest rate decreases, there's a lower opportunity cost of holding money in your checking account, so therefore the quantity of money demanded increases. Just like any demand curve, once we build that relationship, we're going to be able to shift it. So we can always increase to the right or decrease to the left. Here's a really intuitive example. Let's say we start the scenario with some given demand for money in the economy, and then all of a sudden the price level increases. So if the price level goes up across the whole economy, what's going to happen to the demand for money? Well, it's going to increase. It's going to increase to the right. And the reason is our transaction demand for money increased if the price level's up. So our rent's higher, our groceries higher, gasoline is higher. So we're going to need to hold more money on hand in our checking accounts to cover all those costs. So price level goes up, demand for money goes up. And that's actually the first of the three shifters for the money market demand curve. Number one is changes in the price level. When the price level goes up, the demand for money increases. The second shifter are incomes. When incomes go up, the demand for money increases as well. If people have higher incomes, they're going to go increase their consumption. They're going to buy more new cars and new boats and go out to dinner more. So they're going to need to hold more money on hand in order to pay for all those transactions. And then the third shifter for the demand for money is changes in technology. Usually when you have a technological breakthrough, it's going to decrease the demand for money. A really good example of this is the availability of credit cards. So when widespread credit card use started, people didn't need to keep as much cash in their pocket or even as much money in their checking accounts because they could just swipe their credit card all month long and then worry about paying at the end of the month. Also, the widespread use of ATMs decreased the supply of money. With ATMs everywhere, people would be able to go to get small amounts of cash out more frequently, so they wouldn't hold as much in their pockets as they used to. Before modern ATM infrastructure, you used to have to go inside a bank during business hours, wait in a long line, maybe go access your savings account there. So to go through that whole process, it would take a lot of time and money and have a high opportunity cost. So individuals would take out larger amounts of cash when they do that. With modern ATMs, you don't have the need to do that. I always think of my grandma, because my grandma would always go inside the bank to do those transactions, so she would always hold larger amounts of cash because she never trusted ATMs. So those are the three shifters for the demand for money. Increase is always to the right, decrease is always to the left. Let's do some practice MC. Go ahead and pause the video, see how you do on this one. Correct answer is D, medium of exchange. The concept of transaction demand for money is very closely associated with money's use as a medium of exchange. The fact that you can exchange money for goods and services is closely related to that element of transaction demand for money. And let's try number 12. Go ahead and pause the video, see how you do, and we'll go over the answer together. So this is a basic definitional MC. Sometimes it's a little challenging based on where they split the sentence, but if you read through the wording carefully and use process of elimination, usually these are pretty easy. The correct answer is C. The amount of money that the public wants to hold in the form of cash will decrease if the interest rate increases. So this is asking us about the relationship between quantity of money demanded and the interest rate. And if the interest rate goes up, then the quantity of money demanded is going to decrease. In other words, the amount of money the public wants to hold, because they're going to want to move their money into interest earning assets and not have so much money sitting in their checking accounts. Next, let's move to the supply of money. So unlike the demand for money, which is a true market behavior by individuals and households in the economy, the supply of money is actually set. So the money supply is set by the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve, and it's independent of the interest rate. So go ahead and make a prediction. What's going to be the shape of the curve if it's independent of the interest rate and it's actually set by the central bank? Well, it's going to be perfectly vertical. The supply of money is perfectly vertical, and this is really important because wherever the central bank sets the supply of money, it's going to intercept the demand curve and set the actual interest rate. So this market comes to an equilibrium like any normal market, and it actually sets the nominal interest rate. The Federal Reserve in the US is our nonpartisan government office, and they adjust the money supply to influence the economy. And when they adjust the money supply to affect that interest rate, that is monetary policy. This is a really important tool in modern policymaking to expand the economy or contract the economy as needed. And all it is moving over that supply curve of money. Now, when you open the Apple News app and you see the headline, it might say the Federal Reserve just lowered the interest rate to 0.25%. That's what it says in the headline, but in reality, they're not actually moving and controlling that interest rate. The only thing they can control is the supply of money. So they change the supply of money until the equilibrium interest rate is in the range that they want it to be in. So let's practice that with increasing the money supply. Let's say the current interest rate is 5% based on the current equilibrium interest rate. If the Federal Reserve increases the supply of money, in the next lesson, I'll show you the 3 ways that they can do that. But for right now, just follow along with me. If they want to increase the supply of money, what's going to happen? That's going to lower the equilibrium interest rate, in this case from 5% to 2%. So as a result of increasing the supply of money, the Federal Reserve has lowered the interest rate. Why would they want to do this? Well, they want to affect the whole economy. So this is where you can connect it to the aggregate demand curve. Okay? If we increase the supply of money, we're going to decrease the interest rate, which is going to increase investment spending. When the interest rate decreases, businesses go out there and say, man, we could borrow money to build a new factory really cheaply. We're going to increase investment spending, which is, of course, going to increase aggregate demand. And just like they would with fiscal policy, this can be used to close a recessionary gap. So that's how this graph is going to be used. This graph is a policy making graph that allows us to look at monetary policy to change the interest rate, and our whole goal of changing the interest rate is to influence the aggregate demand curve. Okay, now let's do it the other way. Let's imagine that we have an initial interest rate of 5% based on the current supply and demand of money, and then we're going to decrease the money supply. Let's look at the series of events that would impact the whole economy. If we decrease the money supply, that's going to create, right at that initial interest rate of 5%, it's going to create a temporary shortage, and when there's a shortage of money, it's going to drive up the interest rate to a new higher equilibrium, in this case 10%. So by decreasing the supply of money, we increase the interest rate to 10%. And the big question is, what's that going to do to aggregate demand? Well, we decrease the supply of money, which increased the interest rate, which decreased investment spending. Businesses are going to go out there and say, oh my gosh, if the interest rate is 10%, I'm not going to borrow money to build that new factory anymore. I'm going to slow down on my investment spending, which is going to, of course, decrease aggregate demand. So this would be an example of contractionary monetary policy. If the economy is overheated, the central bank could get involved by decreasing the money supply, and along those series of events, ultimately you would get you'd be able to close an inflationary gap. Those steps that are written out at the bottom of the slide are really, really important. You need to explain the series of events that leads to the contraction in aggregate demand. A common mistake is students will draw this graph and they will say, because the interest rate went up, there was a decrease in aggregate demand. That's not sufficient. You need to explain the 4 events that happened to ultimately create that decrease in aggregate demand. So in our course, we're always going to speak about the Federal Reserve in generic terms. Oftentimes the questions will just ask about any generic central bank, so you won't need to know much detail beyond that in terms of controlling the supply of money. But the Federal Reserve in the U.S. is an incredibly important and interesting institution. It was actually created back in 1913 with the mandate to regulate banks and make sure people have faith in our financial system. So I'd encourage you to research the history of the Fed and also current innovations in monetary policy. But for the purposes of our course, we're going to keep it generic, and we're going to talk about the Fed or the central bank increasing or decreasing the supply of money like we did in this video. So that's macro topic 4.5, the money market. Just one more time, this is a key policy making graph. This is one of the 5 key graphs of macroeconomics that you're going to need to know and draw and interpret. But it's a little bit different than all the other ones we've done in this course so far. It's not a graph that shows us the status of the whole economy. So it's not like ASAD or the Phillips curve where we're analyzing where is the whole economy at right now. We're just looking at the nominal interest rate, and it's a policy making graph that's going to be used for monetary policy to impact the ASAD model. Thanks for your attention. Enjoy the rest of your day.